patients who can't hold down food or have no appetite. So I think that's the most common way that I interact with it. People say, is that crazy? Is this something I should talk to my doctor about? My kid brought me a joint and we're kind of explored, and I could eat for the first time in a long time. Is that bad? Is it going to have an interaction? A lot of the time I'm having these conversations and reaffirming that it's really important to talk about this with their medical provider. Which is a great thing. I also know that people, I hear a lot of feedback around not wanting the psychoactive effects of marijuana, that, not wanting to feel high is something that happens a lot. For some people, it's what they want, but for some, it's not. Things like, increasing paranoia. Sometimes that happens. Our brains are so full of chemicals, and we can talk about that a little bit later, that, people don't want to feel paranoid or feel more anxious, or, sometimes the effect of marijuana use can create more issues like tachycardia, or kind of the, beating heart out of your chest kind of experience, and patients don't really want to have that. So it is kind of that balance and kind of the cost benefit analysis. So again, like with research or just what's out there now, being able to kind of hone in, it sounds like, on what people are wanting. But what about you, Margaret? I mean, I'm curious from your perspective, what you're kind of seeing, or what those recommendations would be, or kind of how you would approach that particular side effect, which is one of the most common.
Mm-hmm. Well, there everything that you just said. And usually, because I'm a holistic nutritionist, when people are coming and say they are a cancer patient, then I'm always, working in conjunction with the supervision of their primary care provider. And, I'm usually just very dialed into what is the protocol that they're, using at the moment, and trying to be complementary to that and supportive of that. And I'm not driving any of these decisions, because at the end of the day, it's really a discussion that they have to have with their doctors, and a decision that they have to make on their own. And so my training and my background, which is in nutrition and also mind-body wellness, when it comes to, cancer patients, I do try to include everything in terms of like stress reduction, anti-inflammation type of exercises, breathing exercises, in addition to nutrition. And if they are, using medical cannabis, there are certain things that you can do to help with brain fog, like eating, whole organic eggs and cruciferous vegetables. It can help with improved focus or memory. Peppercorns are known to help with paranoia, not specifically chewing on them, although you do hear a lot about that. But, black pepper essential oils is a really great way to help with that. It doesn't work in the same way for everyone, and exactly the same as how cannabis doesn't affect everyone in the same way.
Right. And I think you're touching on something really important in holistic care, which, being a psychologist in a medical setting, working often with a team of nutritionists or acupuncturists, and just kind of different supplementary, wellness to this medical lens. So much of things are trial and error, and so much of a patient experience is evolutionary. What may be working, in one part of treatment may not work in the second part of treatment, to help with the side effect profile. So it's always, I love hearing that, because I know doctors who are so wonderful and always want to spend more time with patients, but oftentimes are so grateful for their a real comprehensive team, because we get to give that feedback back. Hey, this patient's really kind of wondering about this or struggling with this. What do you think about that? Because there's never enough time.
Right. And back to some of the cannabis risks. These are pretty like big overarching things that we're always going to talk about in terms of, things that you might, observe in yourself, which are potential allergies. Some people are just allergic to cannabis, and it can trigger skin reactions or breathing issues. So, that's one thing to think about. And also, obviously, the impact of cannabis that it has on a developing brain and things like that. But outside of the usual, like my disclaimers, I usually call them. If you are on, let's say, a client of mine who has fibroids, and she's been working with a doctor on whether or not to, go through with the surgery. And one thing that she missed telling her doctor was that she was on a high dose of curcumin, and curcumin is a blood thinner. Mm-hmm. Taking all these things, thinking that it is natural and it's just a plant, or but they actually have blood thinning properties in addition to the blood thinner that she's already taking. So these are some of the things that are very personal and unique to each person. And another reason why, I always tell my clients that you have to let us know on every single supplement that you're taking in addition to your diet, because it all has an effect on each other.
Absolutely. And I think encouraging patients to feel comfortable talking about that. Again, I think just the stigma of marijuana use and the change of that, and being able to say, are you what are your current medications, or what are you currently ingesting? Really encouraging our patients to say that and write that down, especially if they're having surgery, and we know, we're not fully aware of the effects of, marijuana use with pre and post anesthesia patients. Definitely it's not recommended, or, patients with higher risks after surgery, like pneumonia, things like that. But I think, people used to not really feel comfortable disclosing because there was fear of judgment. So really, we get to be people that are kind of empowering also our patients to be good patients.
Right. That's true. Very true. And I think you bring up a really good point in helping. There's one component of, working with someone, which is to help them feel comfortable and talking to you about everything that's happening in their lives.
Right.
I'm really curious about what you mentioned earlier about brain chemistry. Can you maybe talk a little bit about that?
Well, yeah. I think, one of my disclaimers is each brain is really different. So what works for some people isn't going to work for everybody. And in general, when talking about psychotherapy, which we know has the impact to change our brains, or psychotropic medication, or even, oral chemos and the effect that it has on things like short-term memory or executive functioning. And cannabis, how do these things play together? How do they dance? We just know so much, and we still know so little. So it's important to, in that world of trial and error, keep that in mind as you're making recommendations. And I know people who do prescribe both cannabis and also medical medication intervention. That's just something to always keep in mind. And I think an important thing to tell patients about that, 50 years ago, smoking a joint, they weren't really talking about the cannabinoid effect in your brain. They were like, is this, I feel pretty chill, or, oh, I have more energy, or I don't, or this is enhancing something, or, I'm sleeping a lot. So we just know a lot more about how different parts of the brain are impacted by different neurotransmitters and different, ingestible items, even alcohol and cigarettes or anything really.
And now even with the added layer of the endocannabinoid system, it's just, there's a lot going on, I would imagine, in the world of mental health.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, for people with much, pre-existing psychiatric disorders, that's a really, learning about susceptibility and the impact of cannabis use, really cannabis use, and among other things, on things like people who maybe don't realize that they have a psychotic disorder or are more susceptible to kind of different clinical experiences in other ways, even things like anxiety, right? That knowing that, hey, there's sometimes parts of cannabis that can actually exacerbate those symptoms, or with depression, exacerbate those symptoms. Really learning about causal effects too, versus acute use of a cannabis intervention versus a chronic use, and how that really changes our chemistry. So, yeah.
What is there anyone that talks about in mental health specifically how strains might, I guess, contribute to exacerbating anxiety or things like that?
Yeah. I mean, I think there should be more. Again, I think there needs to be more education. I think, I've been able to, given the city I'm in, getting my educational background, getting, really good mentorship, and teachers have been able to learn a lot of that. But I would say that not everybody who has a more kind of neurological interest, I would assume and hope a lot of psychiatrists are able to have that conversation or illuminate it. Again, I don't, they ask and screen for those questions, but it's up to the patient to tell the truth and say, yeah, I use this recreationally, or this was prescribed to me also for anxiety, or whatever it is. There was a startup here in the Bay Area that you could get medical marijuana basically within 45 minutes. You call, you kind of explain your symptoms, and one of the, looking at different kind of qualifying diagnosis. You could say anxiety, you could say headaches, you could say sleep, you could say whatever. And a physician would call, not necessarily a psychiatrist or somebody who I think probably has a much larger understanding of the brain chemistry side of things, and would say, okay, well, let's get this for you, which was kind of amazing to me, for better or worse. I think I was like, wow, there are people I know who maybe are abusing that accessibility and kind of, before recreational marijuana was available here, and wanting that. And then on the other side, I was like, wow, this is really wonderful. I have patients who are able to access this from their home. They don't have to go to a medical dispensary. They're, able to feel more comfortable kind of talking with a physician on the phone about these symptoms. I don't know. It's the Wild West, literally.
Yeah, and I can understand that perspective, because I remember working with some of the local doctors here who do provide authorization, and looking at their sort of patient forms, and the area where it does kind of qualify you for whether or not you might be at risk of a family history that has mental health and things like that. But it's not very. There aren't very many questions. It's mostly like, have you had a history of schizophrenia? Have you ever been diagnosed of anxiety, depression? And do you have family history of any mental illness? And, in the beginning it made sense, but the more that I learn about it, the more that I'm like, wait, I think that there's probably more to this that we might want to know. But I read something that really was interesting. And I mean, cannabis is such an ancient plant, and it is referenced in traditional Chinese medicine, and also in Ayurveda, and in Taoist text, I think they reference cannabis use in incense burning to achieve like a state of wellness, or I think in the Vedic scriptures it refers to cannabis as one of the 5 sacred plants. And I also have been reading that cannabis has been used not only in for health and wellness, but also in shamanism. And I'm just really curious about that. Like, in your perspective, why would you think that would, why would it have been used in shamanism?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know a ton. I'll be forthright in saying that, but I think there's such a strong tradition in so many different cultural backgrounds. And in everything. I mean, we could get really out there and philosophical about